So as you guys noticed, I titled this video Spider-Man Brand New Day. Here's what happens. The reason why is because we're covering a story called The Other. And The Other is basically the plot to Brand New Day. Like if you guys saw the trailer, which I don't know anybody who didn't, you're gonna see a lot of things from the trailer in this story. So what The Other did is it was a 12-issue series, crossover if you want to call it that, involving the various Spider-Man titles. Now we are going to focus mostly on the final part, but we do need to run over some of the things that happen in the first part because again, it all sets the stage. In Act 1, Peter Parker basically learns that he's dying. Now he doesn't learn this right off the bat, instead he starts experiencing these kind of vivid dreams and strange hallucinations. For example, he dreams about Morlun, he dreams about Kraven the Hunter, about Uncle Ben. Morlun is what's called an inheritor. For those of you guys who don't know about him, we will talk about that as we get further into this video because I still say that while people say Sadie Sink is playing Jean Grey, I think she's playing an inheritor. But the knowledge that Peter is dying comes by way of a bullet wound. Now his spider sense does go off, so it's not as though he doesn't realize that he's being shot. It was actually kind of a brilliant move by Tracer, the villain that he was fighting at that point, which kind of goes into its own plot thread. But the long and short of it is that bullets are fired off and then they circle back around to Tracer, who jumps right out of the way at the last minute so the bullets hit Peter, and seemingly his spider sense doesn't go off the moment before impact. But what ends up going on here is he goes to visit someone by the name of Dr. Castillo, who was basically recommended to him by Captain America. Now, it is kind of funny here because Peter's a little hesitant to work with Dr. Castillo, where initially he won't tell her what his name is. He's like, just call me Spider-Man or Spidey. She's just kind of like, whatever, right? If you're gonna be my patient though, I'll be running some blood work on you. It's just routine stuff. And Peter's just kind of like, well, Cap said you could be trusted, so I guess that's okay. And that kind of like disregard, that hesitance is sort of like, okay, well, I mean, thanks for the vote of confidence. But Castillo also plays it pretty cool, where she tells Peter that according to the law, that she has to take the identity of a person who's injured with a gunshot wound and report it to the authorities, but she's not going to do that. And she even goes so far as to tell Peter, like, she puts her license at risk by dealing with superheroes and not really following the law the way that she's supposed to. But it's kind of instilling trust in Peter, right? Like, I'm solid. And so one of the things that happens is when she takes a blood sample, she gets the results and then she informs Peter of what's going on. Now, we don't necessarily see him getting the news per se. Instead, it's actually Dr. Castillo calling him up and just telling him the news is really bad. We need to run some more tests, that kind of thing. What you end up doing is transitioning to a conversation between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. And this was one of those kind of stages of grief type scenarios, which is really what The Other was. And again, we'll talk about that once we get towards the end of the story. But the conversation between Peter and MJ initially picks up with Peter, quote unquote, acting sloppy, kind of being reckless, right? The fact that he could have gotten himself killed. The two of them being together, of course, kind of pissed Mary Jane Watson off to no end, right? When you're married, you can't take risks with your life. And so that's one of the things that she says. I know the reasons, your reasons. I finally figured it out. It's survivor's guilt. It's not just that you let the burglar go and then he killed your Uncle Ben. It's that the good, caring man he was died, while the selfish, uncaring man you were lived. You used to tell me in the old days that you'd always run out of web fluid at the worst possible moment. Why not build in an indicator gauge the very first time that happened to warn you, right? Why risk running out ever again? And I think deep down, you really want to be with him. You just can't bring yourself to admit it. So you'll just keep pressing your luck, taking bigger chances, pushing yourself more, and getting sloppier. You want to be with your dead uncle more than your live wife, because deep down, you think you don't deserve happiness, or life, or love, or me. You want to die, and I don't know how to live with that. And that's where Peter tells her, right? You're wrong, right? Like, I do not want to die, but I know I'm going to. And when she asks how he knows that, that's when he presents the letter from Dr. Castillo to him, basically telling him that he is dying. And so this is when you start getting into elements from Spider-Man Brand New Day in the trailer, because what Peter does is he goes to visit Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. But before he gets there, he ends up running into Morlun again. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, and this kind of brings in that bit of a conversation with Sadie Sink, a lot of the exploration of Morlun has just kind of been done over the years within Marvel Comics. There's not one particular like catch-all comic. I mean, there kind of is, but there kind of isn't. You draw bits and pieces from J. Michael Straczynski's run and from things like this, Peter David during the Other storyline, especially from Dan Slott's run. So if you guys want more information about Inheritors and Morlun, then what I'm going to give you here, I will link down the Spider-Man playlist that basically starts with the Spider-Man Brain Trust following One More Day and does include One More Day, and goes all the way through Dan Slott's run to everything that's happening now, which also includes Superior Spider-Man and Spider-Verse. So you get all the good stuff with that playlist. But the long and short of Inheritors is that these are beings that travel the multiverse, and while they traditionally feed on spider people, they can feed on virtually any being that is effectively an avatar of the animal kingdom. So this includes people like Black Panther, so on and so forth. Now, this was technically Black Panther Volume 5 when that happened, so it was actually Shuri, it wasn't T'Challa, but the point is that normally they chase down spider people. Morlun had been around for a while, he was believed to have been dead, but had returned at this point in time. What matters is this: Morlun is a hoss, and Peter Parker really facing off against him was fleeing for his life. That when Morlun first fought Peter, Peter had never faced off against anyone like that before. Morlun was faster, he was stronger. I mean, he had this kid on the ropes, and it's no small wonder Peter made it out alive in one piece. But one of the things that goes on here is that when Peter encounters Morlun, he just tells him, I just kind of want to watch you deteriorate. Honestly, watching you suffer and die is the best thing that I could possibly experience, because Peter had previously defeated him. But to that larger point about Peter going to visit the Fantastic Four, he actually ends up going to see a combination of Reed Richards, Tony Stark, and Hank Pym. And when Reed does his analysis on Peter, Reed tells him, right, there's cellular degeneration, but it's not cancer or anything traditional. And so where Hank Pym just says, I don't really get it either, I feel like it's tied to the radiation-based infection that gave him his powers, but I'm not an expert in that field. That's when they realize only one person is. And so ultimately, with the help of Bill Foster, they end up going to visit Bruce Banner. Now, you're probably going to see this whole segment with like the Fantastic Four and Hank Pym and all those guys skipped over. And what's going to happen in the movie is Peter's going to go straight to Bruce. Now, once they get to Bruce Banner, he's in his Hulk form, all kinds of hell breaks loose, they all kind of end up getting into a fight. Bill Foster Goliath is doing what he can. He ends up getting hit in the knee. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on here. But of course, once it all calms down, because it's really more comedic than anything else, once it all calms down, they end up bringing Bruce Banner back to Fantastic Four headquarters. And so Bruce Banner ends up analyzing Peter Parker. And that's where Peter, in looking at him, realizes something's off here. And he asks him, right, like, your face does not scream cure. And Bruce Banner tells him, I'm going to need some more time, because unfortunately, at the rate that it's spreading, you don't really have very long. And so Peter almost kind of gives up and says, look, man, if you can't help me because you're the guy who knows more about radiation than anybody else, then no one can. And so that's where Bruce tells him that might not be the case. I do have a suggestion, and I'm all ears. And so what ends up happening is Peter goes to visit Black Panther in Wakanda. And I do feel like, now that I'm looking at this, maybe we covered it in some capacity, because there comes a moment, and I'm like 90% sure at least we've covered this moment in Marvel Comics. There comes a point when he goes to Wakanda, he gets some work done. It's one of the funniest moments in comics. He gets some work done, and then Black Panther comes back with the results, and Peter's getting cornrows. The women in Wakanda are giving him cornrows, and this has been like a meme across the internet. And like, I want to say that panel down at the bottom where Black Panther was looking at Peter, someone responded to that on Twitter, and they were like, Peter knew he did wrong. It's one of the funny moments from all of this. But again, Black Panther goes to talk to Peter by himself. And so Peter kind of recollects on all this. And he's like, I have to face the facts, right? I've tried every expert possible. There is no way around it. I am going to die. And I never thought that I would go out like this. I mean, I always thought that I would die, but in a quick but stupid way, like a fatal paper cut from Batroc the Leaper. And so the last ditch effort of Peter Parker to find someone who can help him is to turn to Doctor Strange. But even with all of his power and all of his abilities, Doctor Strange cannot fix him. And so again, you finally get this kind of final fight between Peter Parker and Morlun. Now, this is one of those kind of settling all family business type of scenarios, but it's also the idea that over the course of Peter David's run, as well as the beginning of Reginald Hudlin's run, that Morlun had kind of been stalking Peter Parker and taunting him with the idea that Morlun will go after Aunt May, different things like that, basically destroy Peter Parker's life. And the fact that Peter's dying means there's nothing he'll be able to do about it. So at the very least, defeating Morlun will keep his family safe, even if he himself, Peter, is not going to survive all of this. So it's a dying man trying to save those he cares about. Now, the other thing here is that Peter's waning in terms of what he's traditionally able to do. And so this is not just a fight for survival regarding his family, it's a fight for survival for himself to last just a little bit longer. And that's why he says things like, I have to get away from him, or at least get him away from people. And so as the fight stretches on, they finally get to their final battleground, right, where the fight is officially going to end. And in fact, Peter recognizes that, right? The irony, here is where I make my last stand. The reason why is because they're at Empire State University, right, where Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider in the first place. But again, Morlun is astoundingly fast, much faster than Peter can keep up with. And so it becomes very apparent to Peter very, very quickly, this is a losing fight, because the longer it goes on, the weaker he becomes. He's getting thrown into stuff, right? He's getting manhandled. It's not even really much of a competition anymore, to the point that Morlun just kind of starts walking towards him, taunting him. And Peter even says things like, I have never been hit that hard, and I've gone toe to toe with the Hulk. I mean, look at this guy. He's not even sweating. And he tells him, right, I will tell your family that you did your best, and just clocks him. Takes his eye out, like literally plucks his eye right out of his head, eats the thing, and then starts beating Peter Parker within an inch of his life. And everyone who shows up here, right, once Morlun takes off and the fight's effectively over, everyone who shows up here thinks he's dead. Right, the cops who are looking at all of this, they make the statement, whoever he was, whatever his name used to be, he is not anymore. No one could pick that face out of a lineup, not a single person. And we're even told the name is gone, the man is gone, only the spider remains. And in fact, we're told how bad the damage is, right? Confirm, multiple broken ribs, bone penetrated his left lung, collapsing it, filling it with fluid. The pulse is irregular, a concussion, heavy intracranial bleeding. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Spider-Man being alive right now is due to nothing more than just sheer force of will. And you're probably going to see this in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Spider-Man Brand New Day. But again, that's where Morlun shows up with the final act of looking to absorb the life energy of Peter Parker. But Mary Jane Watson arrives on the scene and goes to attack Morlun. And this is where you get into the final act of The Other and the new Spider-Man, what you're going to be seeing in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Because in the middle of the attack on Morlun, Peter comes to. He snaps up and immediately starts attacking Morlun. He's only got one eye, but it looks starkly different. And even he looks starkly different. He doesn't even really look like a normal person anymore. His eyes glowing red, his teeth are almost like fangs. The guy looks in a lot of ways like a spider. Not only that, when the Avengers start to show up on the scene, by that point in time, Peter's already doing the work. He's literally tearing apart Morlun and absorbing all life energy that he has. And that's what Morlun says, right? This is not how it was meant to be. This is not how it was supposed to happen. And so Peter destroys Morlun. And when that happens, Peter just kind of lays on the floor, essentially dying at that point. Mary Jane, of course, runs to his aid, being there for him as best she can, but he tells her, listen to me, right? I am out of time. I am all broken up. And he says, you cannot fix me this time. I can feel it, but I can't go without saying I love you one last time. And he says, be happy, MJ. Don't give up. Live for me. And when he says goodbye, he passes away. And that is where everything changes. And so when Peter's taken, right, by the Avengers, and MJ is there, and everybody's kind of grieving over the loss of Peter Parker, as significant as it is here, suddenly intruder alarms start going off. And when that happens, everybody arrives at Lab 6. And of course, Mary Jane Watson is told, you cannot be in here, right? Even Iron Man tells you cannot come in here. You cannot be in this place. But once she gets inside, you do have the body of Peter, but the body's now effectively a shell, right? Almost as if he just kind of shed his skin, molted, and then left his physical body. And no one really knows how to process this, right? In fact, everyone's kind of looking around, right? Iron Man says, Jessica, get Mary Jane Watson to living headquarters and make sure she's okay, and make doubly sure she does not come back here. Captain America says, I checked on May. I made sure she was all right. What in the world happened here? But everyone's looking at it all, right? And that's what the question's asked. What kind of sick person would do something like this? How did they find him? But even Iron Man says, I don't know who it was or how they got in here or why they did this. Desecration. But whoever it was, we have to find them. And God help them when we do. And that's where Captain America kind of looks around and is like, something's a little off here. And initially Iron Man's like, okay, like, what do you see? And Steve tells him the window's completely shattered, but there's not much glass on the floor. Most of it seems to have fallen outside. So it means the window was not broken by someone trying to get in. It was shattered by someone trying to get out. And so again, they're still kind of running on this idea that someone got into this facility, right? Got into Avengers Tower and basically desecrated the body of Peter and then somehow broke out. And that is where you really start to realize that Iron Man's putting the pieces together incredibly fast, because he tells Captain America, right? He says, Steve, the security system I put in here is damn near foolproof. So either someone is very smart or very dangerous, or, and where Steve Rogers is kind of like, what's the or? He just looks at the body of Peter and realizes it's opened like a cocoon. And it turns out the real Peter Parker is under a bridge, literally kind of cocooning himself. And that's when you pick up with what's going on inside, where a voice says, wake up. Now, this is where I think the voice of Keith David from the trailer comes into play here, because Peter wakes up, but he's basically in the mindscape, that he's in this kind of a jungle place of sorts. And then he starts to see different people from his own life, including himself, right? It bit me. And that's where Uncle Ben's like, what's wrong, Peter? And he says, the spider, it bit me. And Uncle Ben asks him, right, did you see where the spider went? And Peter just points over there, and it's this gigantic spider. And he says, be careful, don't let him get near you. He will kill you. He kills everyone who gets close to him. Every single person. Now, this is guilt talking, because by this point in time, Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, right, all these people in the life of Peter Parker have perished in one way or another. In the case of Gwen Stacy, people still argue it to this day. It was either recklessness on behalf of Peter from shooting his webbing into the foot of Gwen Stacy and her neck snapping, or they go with the explanation in the comic from Green Goblin when he said she was already dead. It's very much been a contentious debate that's been going on for decades within the Marvel Comics fan base, but it's the guilt that Peter feels in knowing that it sucks to be the friend of Spider-Man, because when you're Spider-Man's friend, you die. And I don't even say that as a joke. I say it because that's how Peter legitimately feels. And so he's watching all these events unfold, right? He's watching himself as Spider-Man when the robber, the burglar's running through being chased by a cop, Peter let him go, that kind of thing, right? Uncle Ben being consumed, quote unquote, by the spider, that Uncle Ben had to die for Peter Parker to become Spider-Man. And that's where this voice comes out of nowhere and just says, little spider, little man does not understand, never understood what you were and what you are becoming. You were bitten. The venom was inside you. The spider was inside you, but you could not face that, and you couldn't accept that. And what do we do with those parts that we cannot face, that we cannot accept? We take that which is inside and move it outside, because then it's safe. You have chosen to conceal the source of your power, as many do. Only you know the truth. You could have chosen 1,000 different names, allowing that name and that face to protect the secret of what you were inside, but you chose otherwise. You did it because you put the spider outside of you. The spider was just a piece of cloth, an empty husk from which you could emerge human, normal, as though the spider was not still inside of you. Putting it on meant that you could take the spider off, but now the spider has taken you off. You are a fool. And he's told, you treated the gift that you had been given as though it were a toy. You did not look too deeply into what you had become or what you could do. You committed the crime of superficiality, strength, senses, agility, adhesion, the web. These were the simplest tools which had been given, the ones a child would find exciting, and stop before anything more exciting but also more disturbing was discovered. The child never asked, and the man never returned to the question, what happens when you merge a man with a spider? Only at the end did the answer to that question become apparent. You were dead. The spider was not. The spider refused to die, and so the spider fed. It took from the one what it tried to take from the spider, and the spider slept and dreamt of being a man, as the man slept and dreamt of being a spider, until at last the spider awoke to be reborn. But the question remains, reborn as what? Perhaps just as important, Why? What emerges from the healing may be more man than spider, or more spider than man, because what's suppressed for too long must sooner or later become apparent for all to see, and seen with a vengeance. Once in its life, a spider may shed its skin, shed its past, and begin anew. Every wound healed, every injury repaired, every muscle renewed, a lifetime of pain cleansed. This is the second gift of the spider, but this time the spider must not be denied. We, the voice of evolution, the weavers of the web of time, the voice of history speaking through you, must not be suppressed again. Accept us, accept who we are, accept who you are, the man who dreamed of being a spider and the spider who dreamed of being a man. Find within us the gifts you did not know you possessed, the strengths that you were afraid to call your own. Be the man you are now, but now, at last, embrace the other. Embrace us. And so that's exactly what Peter does. He holds his arms out to this gigantic spider speaking to him. And the spider says, do not struggle. The pain you feel is the agony of birth. And Peter emerges from the cocoon with a whole new set of powers. Now, this is where the new abilities of Peter Parker start to come into play. But there is also a bigger explanation that goes on in relation to what's happening to Peter and how it ties in to what Dan Slott eventually does when it comes to Spider-Verse. Of course, Dan Slott takes these themes and then builds on them. But the bigger thing is this. Within Stark Tower, where Peter Parker's body, or at least his skin, resided, what you end up having are a whole bunch of other spiders that show up here and basically take over the corpse. At the same time, Peter does try to find some measure of normalcy, but for the most part, life goes on the way that it did before. He ends up meeting up with Mary Jane Watson and Aunt May, both of which who by that point knew that he was dying before he died, and then of course tells them he'll never leave them again and that kind of stuff. So it's very much a celebration of the fact that Spider-Man is alive. But once he realizes that the very top of Stark Tower has been webbed up, he goes to respawn, like he goes to investigate. And when he gets in there, he ends up seeing this humanoid looking spider. What's crazy about this is we get the first appearance of his new abilities, because he walks in here and he's like, they ate my corpse. It's like being trapped in a trauma movie, right? But then he sees this just like humanoid looking spider woman, right? Clearly made up of a whole bunch of other smaller spiders. But one of the things he does is he pops out basically these stingers, which kind of takes him by surprise because spiders don't have those. I mean, he literally asks, since when do spiders have stingers? And that's when he starts to realize the things that he was seeing in his dream, when he was essentially becoming the other, are abilities that he's now beginning to develop. And that's where he starts to realize this person is almost kind of like a copy of him, right? As he moves, they move. And then of course, they end up punching a hole through the wall and take off. Now, of course, as you could probably imagine, when something like this happens, Peter doesn't just like shrug his shoulders and just be like, well, that was crazy, and then go home. No. He chases her down. And so that's exactly what happens here. There is initially a little bit of a skirmish, but it turns fairly quickly into a conversation between the two, because Peter realizes this thing can talk. And so he asks, right, what are you? Like, do you even know what you are? And so it's a little cryptic at first, right? It says, you are, so I am. One lives, other must live. One dies, other must die. All is good. And so that's where they explain, spiders evolve, and you evolve. Morlun returned for you. Was his time to feast, your time to die, and die you did. The great weaver said, no, not your time, and brought you back. But the great weaver was not alone. Another became angry and said there must be a cost. Now, Peter doesn't really know a whole lot about what they're referencing. He does to a degree, but not much, right? He's like, what are you saying? That a couple of demi-cosmic entities did not have anything better to do than argue about whether my number was up. And that's where he's told, yes, exactly. Your number was up, and I am your opposite number. You define me, and I define you. What you are, I am not. And what you are not, I am. As you evolve, I evolve. evolve or die. So in effect, she's his mirror image, is really what she's saying here. And so this leads Peter Parker back to Doctor Strange, because now we're starting to get back into the mystical world again. And this is really the place you go to when you have questions about those kinds of things. And so Peter asks, right, he says, I drop by here so often, I could just start calling myself a patient. And so after some banter between the two, Doctor Strange tells him, my intention is not to scare you, Peter. Indeed, I'm not convinced there's any reason to be scared. Basically, Peter, you are in the center of a web, a cosmic web that you cannot feel physically, but that is very real nonetheless. And so Peter asks, right, am I the spider? Am I the meal? Which one am I? And that's where Doctor Strange says, that's the odd part. Depending on your perspective, you could be either, or you could be both. And so that's where he kind of muses to himself what he was told by the spider. One or the other. And he's just kind of musing out loud. Of course, Doctor Strange doesn't know what he's talking about, but that's not a great big huge deal. And so Doctor Strange just tells him, right, I'm sorry that I couldn't be more clear. The cosmic forces that you disturbed with your return have made a big uproar in the netherworlds. It makes it hard to read. Now, it's important to understand here, because things are being explained this way, it's pretty clear that what Dan Slott did was take these themes and rework a lot of them once we got into the Spider-Man Brain Trust, and then once the Spider-Man title became the sole run of Dan Slott. That's why a lot of these things feel like they're laying the foundation and the groundwork for a lot of what we saw during Spider-Verse. The totems, different things like that, right? So the Scion, the Bride, the Other, all that kind of good stuff, the Inheritors and everything. That's what Dan Slott was doing, reworking all of this. Again, that's down in that playlist. Not only that, we start to get the reveal of more powers that Spider-Man has, because there's a kind of explosion out in the distance, and Spider-Man goes and responds to everything. Of course, there's somebody calling for help, as there usually is, and he kind of calls out, right? Is everybody okay? Does anybody need any help? Move back in case this wall collapses, right? Like, I'm going to try to lift this thing so you guys can get out, or at the very least, I can rescue you. And he does, right? He lifts it up, people start escaping, and that's where one of the women say, my daughter was right behind me, I have to go back. And Spider-Man's like, no, you stay here, get to safety, I will take care of your daughter, which is cool to see that despite the circumstances, Spider-Man will put his life on the line however he needs to. But that's where some of the new abilities come into play, because Spider-Man can now see in the dark. He's got night vision. You're undoubtedly going to see that in Spider-Man Brand New Day. And that's where he recollects back on what he was told by the spider. Strength, senses, agility, these were the simplest tools which you have been given, the ones a child would find exciting, and stop before anything more exciting, but also more disturbing, was discovered. The child never asked, and the man never returned to the questions. What happens when you merge a man with a spider? And so what Peter's starting to realize here is he's tapping into these new abilities. And so him having night vision in this collapsed building allows him to see where others can't. Not only that, he also figures out he has organic webbing. He can shoot it straight out of his wrists now. Now again, you see that in the trailer, right? There's a point where he falls when he comes out of the cocoon, and then suddenly he catches himself. That's because he's shooting webbing out of his wrists. And that's where even more abilities come, because while he's running around with no shirt on and is more ripped than I think we've ever seen him in our life, he also discovers that in addition to being able to cling to walls with his fingers the way he traditionally has, his whole body can do that now. And so this young girl can grip his back, and he can basically hold on to her using his ability to grip on his back and get her to safety, which now frees up his arms in a way that he wouldn't have been able to do before. So he's now become a far more agile and far more capable Spider-Man. And thank God for it, because they end up getting out of this building right as it collapses. Like they're literally fleeing through this thing as it's falling apart behind them. And so that's when you switch over to this bit of a conversation between Mary Jane Watson and Peter based on these new abilities, right? There's a whole news broadcast about Spider-Man saving this girl. We know J. Jonah Jameson's going to lose his mind because he hates seeing Spider-Man as a hero. When they start talking about his powers, he says, that's the thing. The day that I was bitten by that spider was maybe the best day of my life. That night, not so much. I always loved science fiction and horror movies. Forbidden Planet, The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original, not the Keanu Reeves version. The Fly, right? It was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen, and I thought if that was what you get when you genetically cross a man with something as harmless as a fly, how much worse would it be? What kind of horror would you get by genetically merging a man with a spider? And he says, I was so scared MJ, but he talks about getting over it. And he says, but I also never looked too closely at my powers. I accepted what jumped out at me, but didn't really poke much beneath the surface. I think part of me was afraid that if I looked too close, that what I would find wouldn't be pretty. As I got older, I just accepted the limits of what the kid's version of me had been willing to accept. But now, I think maybe there's even more to the powers that I got that day, and maybe I can use them to help people more than I've ever imagined. And he says, tonight, if I hadn't been open to those powers, I might not have reached that girl in time. And so it's him embracing these new abilities. The irony behind all this is that Iron Man's actually got a bug where he's kind of listening to everything going on just to make sure that Spider-Man hasn't gone off the rails after gaining these new powers. And of course, we end up discovering he's building the Iron Spider suit that will appear in Civil War. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. For those of you guys who are curious why these new abilities don't appear in the Spider-Man comics now, honestly, it was because for the most part, after the Other and a few tail-end stories, they just stopped showing up. Marvel never really did anything with them, and it kind of sucks. Anyway, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.